Welcome to the video lecture on migration. The picture you are looking at is there's actually a couple of these, but this picture here is of Ellis Island in New York, between New York and New Jersey, actually. And this is where migrants would be processed, immigrants, when they came in from Europe mostly into the New World. So this is kind of a building symbolic of migration. We're going to talk about migration today in different types. Okay, very simply, migration is moving from one place to another. And it doesn't have to be permanent. A lot of times it is, or for, at least a period of time. So we can kind of think of migration as moving to a different place for a period of time. We can do what we call circulation, where we go to work and come back and go to work and come back. And that kind of is migration too. But we're talking more about for lengths at a time. All right. So why do we migrate? Why do we come up with? And if I had you to write down in your notes, think of 5 reasons that you would move. So go ahead while you guys are taking your notes, which you should be doing. Hopefully you're doing. I'm going to give you about a minute or two, and I want you to come up with 5 reasons that people would move. So go ahead. Okay, so you probably came up with ideas like this. The first one is probably the one why most people migrate, and that is there's just job opportunities, and that's probably why your parents moved to Denver as some sort of job opportunity. So that's the number one reason we typically move. But other ones could be, you want to get to a nicer climate. You want to get closer to family, or in the case of you guys going to college, maybe you want to get away from family for a little bit. If you go to college, then you're talking an educational opportunity. But then there's some other ones that, are either forced or not really your choice. So things like war, disease, maybe you just want a different scenery. You're tired of Denver and you want to go somewhere else. Then you could talk about like forced, so like human trafficking or slavery or something like that, political or religious persecution, where people are, believe a certain religion and that religion is not treated well, or people are put in jail, or their lives are threatened, or something like that. So, people migrate for a variety of reasons. All right. So one of your key terms is E.G. Ravenstein, and really, I just want you to kind of think of Ravenstein as the laws of migration. And so that's really our key term card, is just kind of put together and just put Ravenstein's laws of migration. And he said that, not 100%, but there are patterns of migration, and there are typical people who, what we would say, they select themselves. And so this is kind of another idea as well called migration selectivity. So I guess it might be easier to think of what migration selectivity is not. So typically, if you are like a grandma and you're 85 years old, you are typically not going to be a migrant. So there's kind of there's a range of migrants that kind of fits the mold of what a typical migrant looks like. Okay, so I'm going to go through these, and just if you need to stop the video to write them down, just put it on pause, because I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, probably faster than you can write most of the time. So Ravenstein's law, number 1, most people move for economic reasons, so jobs. Okay, most migrants typically move short distances and within their own country. It's very difficult to move outside of your country, especially if the country you're moving to, the people don't speak the same language. Maybe they're not in the same religion, not the same culture or customs. Okay, long distance migrants tend to head for economic harvest, and what we mean by that is typically migrants move to cities. So, if you're down in Mexico and you're going to move to America, not only are you typically going to move closer, like Texas or someplace that's closer to Mexico, but you're going to go to places like Dallas or Houston or El Paso or San Antonio. But even if it's farther away, Raton, New Mexico is closer than Denver, but you're likely to go to Denver even though it's farther away because that's where more jobs and opportunities and maybe even people that kind of look and act like you are, because people tend to cluster with people that are ethnically similar to them. Okay, most short distance migrants typically are female, whereas most long distance migrants are single males, and single males typically in their 20s to 40s. Now, if you have like a married husband, let's say again, coming from Mexico, usually the husband will come first, get a job, get a place to stay, and then move the wife and the kids up later. And then most long distance migration is what we call circulation. So this will be a key term card. Circulation means it's not permanent. So you go at one time of the year and you go next. So again, just sticking with the theme from Mexico, since that's where the primary migration patterns are, with the United States. If I'm in Mexico and I migrate from Mexico to, let's say, California, and I work in orchards in California and like the Central Valley, when the harvest is over, it's likely that I'll go back to Mexico, back to my home. And then when it's spring again and there's work on the farm, then I'll come back up from Mexico, and I just keep doing this over and over again. And that's called circulation. So circulation is kind of the movement and counter movement, flow and counterflow of migration. All right, those are Ravenstein's laws of migration. And worldwide, right now, the trend is for, at least for LDCs, is that most migration worldwide is rural to urban. So if you're looking at in terms of like an LDC, it's rural to urban. Now, if you're talking about MDCs, we've seen a pattern in the last 20, 30 years of urban to suburban. So it's a little bit different in MDCs. Okay, external migration. External migration has a couple of names, and there you can see the wall that we've built between Mexico and the United States. Looks like it's working very effectively. I'm sure it'll stop all migration. All right, and so external migration means I'm moving from one country to another. I'm crossing a border and going to another country. So international, out migration, external migration, you might as well just put all three. They all mean the same thing. So external migration, international migration, out migration is when people move to a place beyond their country's borders. And, you're talking about from the United States to Mexico, or likewise, or, something like that. Okay. Now, there's two types of out-migration that we need to know. One is ammigration, and then the other one is immigration. And so when you have ammigration, that's when people leave your country. So if we say that 250,000 Americans decide to leave America and go to another country, when they leave America, they are called an e-immigrant. And this is kind of a different term for us because we don't typically think of Americans as like people leaving our country. It doesn't happen certainly as much as people coming into our country, which is called immigration. So this is the one we're more familiar with. So immigration is when a person enters a country, and so that's what we're used to. So if people from Mexico come into our country, that is immigration. Again, immigration, IM versus EM, where people are leaving. And I made some good generic names there. So if Joe, for your examples, if Joe decided to leave the US and move to Kazakhstan, that's really a hotbed of American emigration, he would be an emigrant. And if Ivan came into the United States, good old Russian Ivan, he would come into the country, and he would be an IM, immigrant. Okay, next, net migration. Net migration is kind of the sum total, or the, after you've added and subtracted all the people coming in and all the people leaving, What do you have in terms of migration? So the way we could look at this is if there are more people coming into the country, which is typically the case for the United States, then we have what we call net in migration. However, if you are, say, like, I don't know, maybe a sub-Saharan African country where things are not that great, and if you can afford to, or if you can, you get out and you go somewhere else. If you have more immigrants, then that's what we call net out migration. Okay, you have a key term card for the population equation. I know this looks kind of fancy, but really it's not that difficult. So the population equation for any country is you take the population at the beginning of the year, and that's the PBOY. So population at the beginning of the year, and then you have to take the total number of people being born against the total number of people dying. And then you add that or subtract, depending on what it is, to the amount of people coming in and the amount of people leaving. And then whatever your population is at the end of the year, then that's your population equation. Okay, so if we kind of quantify this, it's probably a little easier to quantify it. Let's just make the math really simple. Let's say that we have 500 people at the beginning of the year. We have 46 total births and 34 total deaths. So that, that's going to be 12. And then you add that to the amount of people coming into the country, 38, minus the amount of people that are leaving, which is 20. So you should get 32 added to the population that already existed. And at the end of the year, then you would have 532 people. So again, that's how you would figure the population equation. All right, next, internal migration. So internal migration can be called internal migration or domestic migration. Domestic means within our country. And remember that quite often, this is what happens the most. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary for people to leave their home country and go to another country. It does happen. But please understand that domestic migration happens all the time, and it happens much more often. So domestic migration is when people move within the borders of their own country. Now, there are some kind of different types of this, and circulation doesn't have to be internal migration necessarily, but usually is. But if you're like I talked about earlier with the example of you come up and work from Mexico to California in the orchards in the spring, and then you leave after the harvest season to go home, and then you come back next spring. That's circulation. So circulation, just kind of think it as not necessarily a circle, but you migrate, you're there for a while, then you come back. So let's say that you're like a college student. You leave in the fall, you might come back over fall break, you go back to college, then you come back over holiday break, Thanksgiving break, you go back, and then you come back over Christmas or it's like a seasonal holiday break there. Then you go back, and then you come back for spring break, and then you go back, and then you come back for summer break. And if you keep doing this over and over again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, that is what we call circulation. And then you can see some other examples of circulation you're welcome to use for your key term card. All right, there's another card that we need to know, and we'll actually cover this a couple times throughout the year, but it's a type of circulation. So understand that it is a type of circulation called transhumance. The difference is this is when people, they change elevations for their circulation. So, for example, let's say that the example I'm going to use is I'm a yak herder in Nepal, and in the summertime, my yaks get really hot, so I take them up high in the elevation in the mountains of the Himalayas, where it's nice and cool. There's grass growing, there's freshwater spring runoff from the mountains. And then, at some point it's going to get too cold. So then I go down in elevation during the wintertime to where it's a little warmer. And, then the next summer I go back up in elevation. I kind of keep going up and back and up and down and up and down and up and down. And that is called transhumance circulation. Okay, and I use Nepal, but you could use a goat herder in Namibia. That would be fine too. All right, next concepts, interregional migration versus intra-regional. So really what we need to look at there is we need to know what a region is, and you guys should know what a region is an area with common characteristics. And then you need to know those prefixes of inter versus intra. So inter is going to mean between, like between two different regions. Intra-regional means that it's inside that region. So if you're doing intra-regional migration, so inter migration, then that means you're going from one region outside of your region to another region. So let's say that we're going from the Northeast, like Boston, and then we go to the South, like New Orleans. That would be interregional migration. Whereas intra-regional migration means you're staying within your own region. So that would be like, me moving from Denver to Colorado Springs, or somebody moving from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins. It's still within that region, but it's still migration, but it's within the region. So that's intra-regional migration. All right, forced migration. So forced migration is when people leave their homeland because their lives are threatened. And what I do not want you to do here is think of a gray area of like a what if, or what if, or what if. Let's just say that any kind of forced migration, it's not your choice. Like you have to move because either you are absolutely made to, or because your life is in danger. And yeah, maybe you could stay and maybe you would make it through, but forced migration just means basically you have to move. So you can see the picture there to the right where you have like a hurricane. I would say that that person is being forced to move. And if they don't move, then they're likely going to die. Okay, so some examples of this. Obviously, slavery, what the United States government did to Native Americans in terms of like the Removal Act of 1830 is a good example of this, where they forcibly removed the Native Americans at gunpoint. Natural disasters like hurricanes or tornadoes, world history examples like the Holocaust, any kind of religious persecution like the Amish were treated in Europe. All of those are good examples of forced migration. Now, voluntary migration is what we think of when you have a choice. And even if let's say you lose your job, you're not being forced to move. I mean, it's probably encouraging you, but it's not like, your life is not necessarily in utter danger. So try not to have a gray area there. If you choose to, when you migrate, then that is going to be voluntary migration. So better jobs, climate, education, to move closer to family. Those are all choices that you make. Okay, last one for this particular lecture. We're going to talk about the difference between push and pull factors. So push factors are things that encourage people to want to leave their own country, or just even, just to migrate. So let's say at kind of the extreme end, you have like religious or political persecution. Maybe your weather's just bad. And so, it's like, I'm going to move from here to there. I'm going to move from Alaska to San Diego. And what's pushing me out is the bad weather. It could be a lack of food or different kind of resources, jobs, or maybe it's even something like armed conflict. Those are things encouraging me to want to leave where I'm at. So the opposite then would be a pull factor. So, if you're leaving, if something's encouraging you to leave because there's religious or political persecution, a rational person is going to, to the best that they can, if they have a choice, they're going to choose a place that has religious freedom or political freedom. If there's a lack of jobs in this city, what's going to attract you to another city that would be the pull factor is that, there's an abundance of jobs or there's available jobs. So these are kind of opposite of each other. Okay. All right. And there you can see some examples down at the bottom. All right. So this is part one of migration notes. And that should be it for today. And thanks for joining in.